The events unfold in France during the 1870s. A young girl named Rosali woke up from a nightmarish dream. In the morning she freshened her face, consumed by anxious anticipation. Her father Monsieur Shahan was preparing to introduce her to her future husband. Rosali was very nervous, pleading with the Virgin Mary to make that man fall in love with her. Rosali was heartbroken as she was taken away from her family home. Shahan did his best to encourage his daughter, reminding her that like any girl her age, she must marry. The journey was long. Abel Deluc, Rosali's prospective groom, suffered from chronic back pain and did little to properly welcome his guests. Before meeting her fiancé, Rosali applied a heavy layer of powder to her face. Shahan assured Abel that his daughter was a very intelligent and talented girl, but Abel was only interested in her dowry, money. Also he loved hunting, which greatly frightened the girl. When Abel spoke to her, she didn't dare utter a word. Even when Abel invited her into his home, she hesitated for quite a while before agreeing. Rosali felt like a stranger in this place. Abel thought the girl was hiding something. Only after Abel complimented the dress she had sewn herself did Rosali warm up a little. Perhaps they could get along after all. Suddenly Rosali declared that she would not agree to a marriage without children. She wanted someone to love her unconditionally. That night in her new surroundings, Rosali couldn't sleep and prayed, hoping Abel would take her as his wife. Shahan also couldn't sleep, fearing that Abel might discover Rosali's secret too soon and call off the wedding. The next day Abel met with Barsolan, the head of the village. Abel ran a business, a cafe, but it wasn't doing well and he was drowning in debt. Even the dowry wasn't enough to cover it. Today was the wedding day. Rosali and Abel exchanged vows before a priest. Rosali still couldn't believe she was now a married woman. She had always dreamed of a large loving family. But the fact that her father was going to leave earlier than planned marred the most important day of Rosali's life. She begged him to stay for at least one more day. Rosali's greatest fear was that her husband would reject her. Advising his daughter to accept her fate as a woman, Shahan departed. That night before being alone with her husband, Rosali once again applied a thick layer of powder to her face. She wanted her secret to remain hidden for as long as possible. It didn't take Abel long to notice that his new wife's face was terribly hairy. The cosmetics could only partially conceal it. In that instant she became repulsive to him. Rosali tried to reassure her husband not to fear her, but he shouted at her to stay away from him and stormed out. Rosali cried until morning. Her entire body was covered in hair, and there was nothing she could do about it. Later, she approached her husband, explaining that her father had spent years saving 15,000 francs to marry her off. When Rosali was a child, he had consulted every doctor, but no cure for her congenital condition existed. Abel couldn't accept such a monstrous deceit and planned to send Rosali back home. Rosali couldn't allow this and was very courteous to Pierre and Paul, regulars at her husband's cafe, even offering them coffee. She had a way of enchanting people with her kindness. Having long accepted her physical flaw, Rosali wanted her husband to come to terms with it too. However, Abel refused to even speak with her, let alone anything more. He didn't see her as a woman. His words deeply wounded Rosali, who was found crying by Paul. Abel too was disgusted by the situation. While his wife wandered far from home, he discovered her embroidery and drawings in their bedroom. Rosali was truly talented and well educated. The next morning Paul brought Abel Rosali's handkerchief, which he had found on the road near the bridge. Abel tracked down his wife, who was hiding in some ruins. Seeing her without makeup, Abel managed to suppress his revulsion and led her back home. On the way Rosali covered her face, afraid of becoming the target of gossip and ridicule. That evening before bed, Rosali shaved her beard, as she always did. While she waited at home, her husband spent time at a brothel. One way or another, they both suffered. One day Rosali overheard a conversation between Abel and Barsolan, who advised him to sell the cafe. That way at least Abel could make a good profit. Later, Rosali spoke with Pierre, a miller and Abel's former comrade in arms. Clearly business at the cafe was bad, and if things continued this way, Abel's business would fail. Pierre found Rosali very kind and intelligent. Before leaving, he remarked how lucky Abel was to have her. Pierre had a wife Jean and 4 daughters, the eldest of whom was named Augustine. Rosali realized that perhaps because of her deformity, she might never know the joy of motherhood. All she could do was pray. When Paul and Pierre played cards at the cafe, Rosali served their table and mentioned that she was a phenomenon, a bearded woman. Naturally the men didn't believe her. So Rosali proposed a bet to Paul for 40 francs and asked him to return in a month. Abel witnessed this conversation and demanded an explanation from his wife. Rosali explained that no one visited the cafe, business was failing, but if rumors about a bearded woman spread, it could attract customers. She just wanted to be helpful in some way. It was worth trying. Abel had no idea what to do. He found solace only in the brothel with women of easy virtue. One of them, Milish, asked if his wife was beautiful. Abel responded with laughter. At dinner, the couple sat in prolonged silence. Rosali refused to shave until she won the bet. Abel didn't even want to look at her. Rosali stayed in her room, spending all her time on needlework. One day Abel dared to peek through the keyhole and was horrified. After crafting a stuffed deer, Abel visited Barsolin and offered to sell it for 100 francs, deducting it from his debt. Barsolin graciously agreed and asked Abel about the rumors surrounding his wife. Abel assured him it was nonsense. When Abel returned home, he wanted to speak with Rosali, but she wouldn't open the door. Abel's patience was running thin, and he intended to tell her father everything. At that moment she emerged from the room, pleading with her husband not to do so. Seeing her with a grown beard, Abel was deeply shocked. Then, regaining his voice, he tried to explain that if people found out, she would become the target of cruel ridicule. However, Rosali no longer wanted to hide. A month later, all the villagers came to Abel's cafe to see the bearded woman. Gathering her courage, Rosali revealed her true self to the people. Everyone stared at her in shock. Silence fell. All wanted to ensure the beard was real. Rosali didn't mind at all. Surprisingly, this didn't repel Paul. On the contrary, he told Rosali she was beautiful. Rosali declared that everyone could feel at home. Other women curiously touched her beard. Abel's cafe filled with customers. Abel didn't know what to feel. Today's revenue was better than ever. From then on, the business began to thrive. Rosali served tables, becoming everyone's favorite. Soon the couple earned enough money to cover their debt. Rosali planned improvements for the cafe, but Abel was still bothered by her beard. He was certain that people would soon tire of it, as their initial interest was purely out of curiosity. A journalist traveled to the area specifically to photograph Rosali and interview her. Rosali wasn't ashamed of herself and didn't hide, though anyone else in her place might have. The journalist suggested Rosali release postcards featuring her image. She agreed, but her husband clearly disliked the publicity. He didn't want to participate in any of it. When the journalist asked how a man could live with this, Abel didn't know how to answer. When drunk Pierre arrived and began touching Rosali's beard, Abel became furious and threw him out of the cafe. Pierre began insulting Rosali, calling her a monster and a monkey woman. Of course, it hurt Rosali deeply to hear this. Abel was enraged and taught Pierre a lesson. Abel continued to suffer from severe back pain. Rosali tried to help him as best she could, but Abel still found it hard to accept his wife's physical peculiarity. He asked her to shave her beard tomorrow. Rosali went to the forest and gathered medicinal herbs. She missed male attention and tried to compensate for it in any way she could. Rosali remained unfailingly kind to everyone, even to those who spoke poorly of her. Seeing her in the village, now sober Pierre didn't know how to behave. Rosali did everything she could to make her husband see her as a woman. This left Abel with conflicting feelings. After preparing an ointment from the medicinal herbs, Rosali applied it to Abel's back. He did not object. Despite her husband's request, Rosali still didn't shave her beard. Barsolin clearly disliked the fact that the cafe began to bring in a significant profit, as it meant he could no longer dictate terms to Abel. The journalist continued photographing Rosali, the phenomenon woman. Paul was also fascinated by this extraordinary girl, finding nothing repulsive about her appearance. The journalist advised Rosali not to remain in this remote area. People would want to see her all over the world. Abel started visiting the brothel less frequently. Milish even began to worry. This time Abel didn't use her services and simply left. At home, he found Rosali playing cards with Jean and her eldest daughter, Augustine. They were laughing and having a good time. Rosali hadn't expected her husband to return just then, as he had planned to spend the night in the city. Rosali suggested finishing the game, and he readily agreed. When they finished, Abel helped his wife clear the dishes. He no longer felt the revulsion toward her that had arisen from his first impression, though he still couldn't cross a certain line. Rosali decided to take matters into her own hands and made the first move to get closer to him. However, it wasn't quite what usually happens between a husband and wife. Barsolin didn't want Augustine to spend much time with Rosali, but the girl didn't care about the village head's opinion. She found a good friend in Rosali. Rosali wanted to have a child, but Abel still couldn't bring himself to do something more with her. Postcards featuring Rosali became increasingly popular. Paul frequently came to the cafe just to see her. One day Milish also came to meet the wife of her favorite client in person. Milish couldn't help but notice how full of life Rosali was. In the evening, after most of the customers had left, Milish approached Rosali to thank her for a wonderful day. Rosali guessed this was the woman Abel visited regularly. That same evening, Abel told his wife she should agree to go on tour. It was obvious he didn't want her to stay here. Moreover, Abel accused Rosali of ruining his life, claiming no amount of money could make up for it. Frightened, Rosali locked herself in the room. She had never seen her husband so angry. Despite everything, Rosali continued participating in photoshoots, unashamed to display her natural self. The photoshoots had now become much more daring. Barsolin came to the cafe for a drink, handing Rosali a postcard with one of her revealing photos. He attempted to take her hands but she pulled away. After paying, Barsolin left in silence. Abel, unaware of the photos, apologized to his wife. There was an uproar at the mill. Augustine had accidentally spilled a flammable liquid, causing a fire. Now Barsolin accused her of being drunk. Rosali's photo spread among the villagers. Barsolin banned her from appearing in church. Rosali couldn't understand what she had done to deserve this. She became an outcast, earning the reputation of a fallen woman. Even Abel received the photo. Rosali didn't try to justify herself. At night, she awoke to the sound of shattering glass. Someone had thrown a stone at their window. Stepping outside, the couple saw Jean running away. An offensive word had been written on their door. In the morning, Rosali frantically scrubbed at the inscription. Abel tried to calm her but she broke into hysterics. The villagers began blaming Rosali for the fire at the mill. Augustine tried to stand up for her, but Pierre refused to listen. When he called Rosali repulsive, she tried to lunge at him. A massive brawl broke out. Abel wanted to intervene, but a crowd of men pinned him to the ground. The villagers were planning to teach Rosali a lesson, and if Barsolin hadn't stepped in on time, it could have gone too far. Rosali can no longer trust anyone, not even her own husband. People hate her simply because she looks different. However, Rosali allowed the local doctor to examine her. He was as delicate as possible, concluding that Rosali was incapable of having children. For Rosali, this was like a bolt from the blue. Her life had completely lost its meaning. Overwhelmed with pity, Abel tried to support her as best he could. In the morning, Rosali ran out of the house wearing only a nightgown and a cloak. She encountered Barsolin, who remarked that a more feminine appearance could improve the situation. Abel searched for his wife in the forest. Meanwhile, she stepped into a swift river, picked up a stone and began attempting to remove the hair from her body. The next morning, Abel woke his wife and asked her to come with him. Despite her apathy, Rosali forced herself to get out of bed. Abel carefully trimmed her beard and mustache. Rosali couldn't hide her smile. She truly appreciated his efforts. Afterward, the couple went to a monastery, asking a nun for a favor. She asked once more if they were sure of their decision. Their silence was taken as confirmation. The nun promised to relay their request and inform them of the outcome later. Even after all her suffering, Rosali did not become embittered or hateful toward the world. When the couple returned home, Abel came close to kissing Rosali for the first time but pulled away at the last moment. When Rosali went to her room, Abel hesitated for a while but eventually followed her. The next day, they strolled through the forest near the river. Rosali suggested they swim together. Abel confessed he didn't know how. The couple wished to adopt a child, hoping the monastery would agree to their request. However, Barsolin opposed the idea, citing Rosali's explicit photos. According to him, hers was not the face or posture of a mother. Paul was one of the few who didn't turn away from Rosali. She dreamed of performing on stage, but there wasn't an audience that could truly see her beauty. One day Shahan appeared and, seeing his daughter with a beard, was about to shoot. It turned out to be just a nightmare of Rosali. Realizing things couldn't go on this way, she gathered her thoughts and left home. Not finding his wife in her room, Abel immediately sensed something was wrong. Rosali showed up uninvited at a charity event. She wasn't expected there, but Barsolin didn't openly drive her away, although he hinted that it was time for her to leave. However, Rosali stayed and raised a toast to love. No one supported her, and she walked away with her head held high. When Abel found his wife, she fainted. A deep wound was visible on her wrist. The nuns took care of Rosali, removing the hair from her face. Despite her weakness, she got out of bed and looked at her reflection in the mirror. Hearing that her father had arrived, Rosali thought Abel wanted to give up on her. Rosali rushed out, stood at the edge of a bridge and then jumped. Abel, unable to stop his wife in time, jumped after her, even though he couldn't swim. In the water they reunited in an embrace. At that moment Rosali was happier than ever. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel not to miss more exciting new products. Also, the authors will be pleased if you leave your opinion in the comments.